There is a city at the center of the world. It has 1 million people inside its walls. It has running water, heated floors, a legal system, a professional army, and the most sophisticated road network ever built by human hands. It calls itself eternal. And if you were born inside it, with dark skin, South Asian features, and an accent that sounds like nothing a Roman has ever heard, you would have exactly 3 paths available to you: slave, soldier, or something so rare, so specific, so historically documented but almost never talked about, that it would change everything you think you know about Rome. Which path would you take? And more importantly, which path would Rome choose for you? Let me be honest with you before we start. Most "What if I lived in ancient Rome" videos give you the fun version. The togas. The feasts. The gladiators. They don't tell you about the smell of 50,000 people with no deodorant packed into the Circus Maximus. They don't tell you what happened to people who looked different from the Roman ideal. They don't tell you about the specific, documented, historically verified experiences of dark-skinned people inside the Roman Empire, because most creators either don't know, or don't want to complicate the story. I want to complicate the story. Because the real story is so much more interesting than the clean version. And it starts with one fact that almost nobody talks about. The Roman Empire was not white. Not even close. Let's establish where you are. The year is 100 AD. The emperor is Trajan. Born in what is now Spain. Not Italian. Not from Rome. The first emperor born outside the Italian peninsula, and one of the greatest military commanders in Roman history. The city of Rome has approximately 1 million inhabitants. By modern estimates, somewhere between 25 and 35% of them are enslaved. Another large portion are freed slaves, liberti, people who have earned or bought their freedom but exist in a complicated legal middle space. The empire itself stretches from Scotland to the edge of the Sahara. From Portugal to modern-day Iraq. Inside those borders, Egyptians, Syrians, North Africans, Mesopotamians, Gauls, Britons, Greeks, Jews, Armenians, Arabs, Berbers, Nubians, and people from every corner of the known world. Rome didn't just conquer these people. It absorbed them. Traded with them. Enslaved them. Promoted some of them. Made citizens of some of them. The Roman Empire was the most diverse political entity that had ever existed on Earth. And that diversity is exactly what makes your situation, a dark-skinned person born inside it, so complicated, so dangerous, and occasionally, so full of possibility. First, let's talk about what you actually look like to a Roman. Because this matters enormously. Romans did not organize their world the way modern Westerners do. The modern concept of race, the idea that skin color determines a fixed social category, did not exist in Rome the way it exists today. This is not a feel-good statement. It's a historical fact, documented by classicists including Frank Snowden, whose landmark work, Blacks in Antiquity, spent decades establishing the record. Romans organized their world differently. They cared about Origo, where you were from. Your homeland. Your people. Status, free, freed, or slave. Citizenship, Roman citizen, Latin rights, or provincial. Class, your economic and social position. Skin color was noticed. Described. Commented on. But it was not, by itself, a legal category. An Ethiopian man who was a Roman citizen had more legal rights than a pale-skinned Gaul who was enslaved. A dark-skinned freedman who had accumulated wealth could, in theory, move through Roman society in ways that a poor white-skinned Roman citizen from the countryside could not. This is not utopia. Rome was brutal, hierarchical, and deeply unequal. But the axis of that inequality was not primarily color. It was status. It was citizenship. It was money. And that changes everything about your story. So, you are born in Rome. Let's make this specific. Your mother is from Nubia, the region south of Egypt, modern-day Sudan, brought to Rome as a slave 15 years before you were born. She works in a wealthy household on the Aventine Hill. She is skilled, she knows medicine, she knows how to manage a household, she has learned Latin fluently. Her enslaver, let's use the Roman term, dominus, master, values her enough to not sell her. Your father is a mystery. Maybe a fellow slave. Maybe a freedman from the same household. Maybe, and this happened, the dominus himself, which would complicate your status in ways we'll come back to. You are born into slavery. In Rome, the child of an enslaved woman is enslaved regardless of who the father is. This is called partus sequitur ventrem, the offspring follows the womb. You have dark skin. Dark eyes. Features that Romans would describe in their literature as Ethiopian, which in Latin didn't mean only Ethiopian but referred broadly to dark-skinned sub-Saharan African people. Romans wrote about this look with curiosity, sometimes with beauty, occasionally with the kind of othering language that makes modern readers uncomfortable. You are, at the moment of your birth, property. But here's what's also true. You are Roman. Completely, totally, culturally Roman. You will grow up speaking Latin. Eating Roman food. Breathing Roman air. Worshipping Roman gods alongside Egyptian gods alongside whatever your mother has brought with her from home. You will know the streets of Rome better than most people alive on earth. You will know which bakeries give extra bread at closing, which fountains have the coldest water, which alleys are dangerous after dark. Rome is yours. In every way except legally. And that gap, between cultural belonging and legal status, is the entire story of your life. Let's talk about childhood. Because this is where it gets human. You are maybe 6 years old. You live in the familia urbana, the urban household, of a man named Gaius Petronius, a wealthy merchant whose family has been in Rome for 3 generations. The household has about 30 slaves. You know all of them. They are your family in every meaningful sense. The woman who braids your hair at night is from Gaul, blonde and tattooed, captured in a raid 15 years ago. The man who teaches you to read, because Petronius wants his household slaves literate, it makes them more valuable, is Greek, educated, bitter, funny, and the closest thing you have to a father. His name is Nikias. He is 40 years old. He has been a slave since he was 22, captured during a pirate raid while traveling from Athens to Alexandria. He was a philosopher's student. He knows Homer by heart. He teaches you Latin grammar using passages from Virgil, and he teaches you, quietly, carefully, in the hour before the household wakes, that the mind is the one thing a dominus cannot own. You are 6. You don't fully understand what he means. By the time you're 10, you understand completely. At 10, you are assigned work. In a wealthy Roman household, child slaves were assigned based on ability and appearance. Good-looking children, and Romans commented freely on the appearance of enslaved people, it was completely normalized, were sometimes assigned as personal attendants to the family's children. Serving at table. Running messages. Visible domestic work. This is both better and worse than field work or manufacturing labor. Better, you are fed well. You are inside. You are not breaking stone or working the lead mines of Spain, where life expectancy for enslaved workers was sometimes measured in months. Worse, you are visible. You are watched. You have no privacy. You are entirely dependent on the mood of people who own you. You are assigned to serve Petronius's son, Marcus, 14 years old, self-important, occasionally kind, occasionally cruel in the thoughtless way of children who have never been told no. You carry his things. You accompany him to school. You wait outside the schoolroom while he learns rhetoric, and you listen through the wall and you learn it too. This is not unusual. This is documented. Enslaved people in Rome absorbed education through proximity. Many became more educated than the free people around them simply because they had no choice but to pay attention. Nicias was right. The mind is the one thing they cannot own. But they can try. At 13, something happens that changes your trajectory. Petronius notices you reading. Not secretly. You didn't know it was something to hide. Nicias had taught you, and reading seemed like a thing people did. You are reading a wax tablet that young Marcus left behind, working through a passage of Cicero with your lips moving slightly. Petronius watches you for a moment. Then he calls you over. He asks you to read aloud. You do. He asks you to translate a phrase from Greek, because Petronius, like many wealthy Romans, conducts business in Greek as well as Latin, and he has been having trouble with a correspondence from Alexandria. You translate it. Imperfectly. But recognizably. Petronius is a merchant. He sees things in terms of value. And what he has just discovered is that a piece of his property, you, specifically, has a skill set he didn't know about and can use. This is the moment everything changes. Not because Petronius is kind. He is not particularly kind. He is practical. And practical, in your situation, is almost as good as kind. You become what Romans called a servus literatus, a literate slave. This sounds like a small thing. It is not a small thing. In Rome, a literate slave was worth anywhere from 3 to 10 times the price of an unskilled slave. Educated slaves worked as secretaries, accountants, tutors, doctors, architects, and estate managers. They ran businesses on behalf of their owners. They carried enormous responsibility. They were still enslaved. Let's be clear. The power dynamic did not change. They could still be punished. Still be sold. Still had no legal personhood. But their daily reality was radically different. You are now working in Petronius's study. You are managing correspondence. You are accompanying him to business meetings as his secretary, writing notes, translating when necessary. You are eating better food. You have a small room to yourself. You are wearing better clothing, because you represent Petronius in public now, and Petronius cares how his household looks. You are 15 years old and you are, in the language of Rome, a valuable asset. Which means you are safer. For now. Let's stop here and talk about something that the comfortable version of this story always skips. The fear. Because this is the human element that never makes it into the history books. You wake up every morning inside a system that has absolute power over your body. Not theoretical power. Real power. Roman law permitted an owner to beat, brand, torture, or execute an enslaved person with minimal legal consequence. Before the reign of Hadrian, who introduced some protections, the consequences were essentially zero. Petronius is not a violent man. You have never been beaten by him. You have seen others in the household beaten. Once, when you were 9, you saw an enslaved man from the kitchen staff punished in the courtyard and you stood very still with your back against the wall and your heart going at a speed that made it hard to breathe. You never forgot that. And it lives in you every day. Not as constant terror, you cannot sustain constant terror, the human nervous system will not allow it, it would destroy you. But as a kind of permanent awareness. A reading of the room that never fully switches off. A sensitivity to mood, to tone of voice, to footstep, to the particular way a door opens that tells you what kind of moment is coming. This is documented in Roman sources, the hypervigilance of enslaved people, the elaborate social reading skills required to survive. It's described from the outside, by Roman writers, usually without empathy. But it's there in the record. You learn to read a room the way Nicias reads Homer. With full attention. With the understanding that every word matters. At 17, Petronius brings you something unexpected. He brings you to the temple of Isis. This requires some explanation. The cult of Isis, the Egyptian goddess, was one of the most popular religious movements in the Roman Empire by 100 AD. Romans have been fascinated by Egyptian religion since Julius Caesar's time. The cult spread up through the empire, and by Trajan's era it had temples in Rome, in Pompeii, in Gaul, in Britain. Isis was particularly associated with enslaved people and the poor. Her mythology centered on loss, loyalty, and resurrection, on finding something precious that had been taken. She offered what Roman state religion didn't: personal relationship with the divine. Direct comfort. The sense that a god saw your specific suffering. Your mother had worshipped Isis since before you were born. She had taught you the prayers, in a language you don't fully speak, the Meroitic of her homeland, mixed with Egyptian and Greek, and you had grown up with a small clay figurine of the goddess hidden in the corner of your sleeping space. Petronius brings you to the temple because he has business there. The temple of Isis on the Campus Martius was also, quietly, a place where certain kinds of commerce happened. Information was exchanged. Introductions were made. But you don't care about his business. You stand in the temple and you look at the priests, some of them dark-skinned, some Egyptian, some clearly of African origin, and you feel something that is very hard to name. Recognition. Not just religious. Something more basic. You see people who look like you, and they are not enslaved. They are priests. They have authority. They are respected. Roman worshippers, wealthy, free, powerful Roman worshippers, are approaching them with deference. It is the first time in your life you have seen this. And it plants something in you that will take years to fully grow. The question of freedom. In Rome, enslaved people could be freed. This was called manumissio, manumission. It happened through several mechanisms. Formal manumission, through a legal ceremony, witnessed by a magistrate, granted full Roman citizenship. The freed person became a libertus or liberta, a freedman or freedwoman. They took their former owner's family name. They owed certain duties to their former owner, called opere, services, but they were legally free. Informal manumission, a simpler process. Granted freedom but not full citizenship. Romans freed enslaved people fairly regularly. Not from moral conviction, Roman slaveholders were not abolitionists, they were not troubled by slavery as a system, but from practical and social motives. Freeing a loyal, skilled slave after years of service was a sign of status. It demonstrated that you were wealthy enough to give away valuable property. It also ensured the continued loyalty of other enslaved people, who now had reason to believe that good service might eventually be rewarded. By some estimates, a significant portion of Rome's free population at any given time were freedmen and their descendants. Petronius has freed slaves before. 2 that you know of. Both after more than 20 years of service. You are 17. You start doing the math. You are 21 when you meet Septimia. She is the freed daughter of a Syrian merchant family. Her mother was born into slavery, freed before Septimia was born, which means Septimia herself was born free. She works as an assistant to a physician on the Via Sacra. She has seen everything Rome does to people. She is clear-eyed about it in a way that comes from having been close enough to the machine to understand exactly how it works. She is also the first person outside the household who treats you like a person rather than a category. You meet at the temple of Isis. You both come on the same festival day. You stand next to each other during the water procession and she says something in Aramaic, her mother's language, and you catch a word that sounds almost like something your mother used to say, and you both stop. And then you start talking. And you talk for 3 hours. She tells you things nobody inside Petronius's household would tell you. Things she knows from the physician she works for, who has treated enslaved people, who has seen what the system does to bodies over time. She tells you about the peculium. The peculium was one of the strangest institutions in Roman slavery. In theory, enslaved people owned nothing. Everything they earned, everything they touched, everything they were belonged to their dominus. In practice, many slaveholders allowed enslaved people to accumulate a peculium, a fund of money, treated as if it were their own, even though legally it belonged to the master. Why? Incentive. A slave with a peculium works harder. Works smarter. Has something to lose. Has something to gain. And the peculium could be used to purchase freedom. Not always. Not guaranteed. The master had to agree. And the price was usually set at the slave's market value, meaning you had to earn, in addition to all your labor which went to Petronius, your own purchase price. For an unskilled enslaved person, this was nearly impossible. For a servus literatus, a literate, skilled secretary with years of trusted service, it was merely very hard. Septimia tells you that the physician she works for, a freed Greek named Claudius Philemon, purchased his own freedom at age 34 by accumulating his peculium over 12 years. You are 21. You have been working as Petronius's secretary for 6 years. You have never been told about a peculium. You have never been given the option. You have never asked. That night, you lie in your room, small, but yours, and you stare at the ceiling and you think about what it means that you have never asked. The next morning, you ask. This is terrifying. Let's not minimize this. Asking your dominus for a peculium arrangement is not like asking your employer for a raise. There is no HR department. There is no legal protection if he decides your asking itself is insubordination. There is no one to appeal. You ask carefully. Formally. Using the exact language Septimia coached you on, the framing that presents the request as being in Petronius's interest, not just yours. A slave who sees a path to freedom works harder than one who cannot, you say. You are quoting, almost directly, a line from Columella's agricultural manual that you read in Petronius's library. Columella wrote it about farm slaves, but the principle transfers. Petronius looks at you for a long moment. He is not a cruel man. But he is not a generous one either. He says, we will discuss terms. That conversation, terms, takes 3 more months of careful, anxious navigation. Every word measured. Every meeting conducted in the tone of a business negotiation, not a human rights conversation, because framing it as anything other than a business negotiation is dangerous. Finally, Petronius agrees to a peculium arrangement. You will receive a small portion of any fees he earns on transactions where your translation work was essential. You will keep a record. He will verify it. In 10 years, at his discretion, not guaranteed, he will consider the question of formal manumission. 10 years. You are 21. Freedom is 31 years old, maybe. You go back to your room and you are simultaneously the happiest you have ever been and more aware than ever of exactly what is being asked of you. Let's talk about the city itself, because you live inside it completely now. Rome in 100 AD is a city of layers. Literally. The wealthy live on hills, the Palatine, the Aventine, the Esquiline. The poor live in the valleys. The insulae, apartment buildings, sometimes 6 or 7 stories tall, crowd the lower districts, cramped and dangerous. Fire was a constant threat. The Great Fire of 64 AD, under Nero, had destroyed enormous sections of the city and the rebuilding had created a new Rome, broader street in some areas, denser and more chaotic in others. You know this city intimately. You know the Subura, the crowded, loud, somewhat dangerous neighborhood between the Esquiline and Viminal hills. Every culture that exists in the empire has a population there. Greek, Jewish, Syrian, Egyptian, North African communities clustered in particular streets and blocks. You go there on your free days. Sunday does not exist yet as a concept, but Roman slaves had some festival days and occasional free hours, and you walk and you listen and you eat. The food of the Subura is extraordinary. Romans ate out constantly. The Thermopolia, fast food counters built into the street frontage of buildings, with round holes cut in stone counters to hold large ceramic containers of food, were everywhere. You could buy hot lentil soup, roasted chickpeas, bread with olive oil, sausage, fried fish, honeyed wine. In the Subura's more international blocks, the food tilts different. An Egyptian woman sells taameya, ground fava bean fritters, from a cart. A Syrian man grills flatbread over charcoal in a technique that looks nothing like Roman bread baking. A Jewish bakery sells challah-adjacent bread that smells of honey and sesame. You eat all of it. And you realize, in the way that food makes you realize things because it bypasses your thinking and goes directly to something more basic, that Rome is not one thing. It is 10,000 things happening simultaneously, held together by roads and law and military force and a shared fiction that this, all of this, is Rome. You are one of those 10,000 things. And that, you decide, is enough. At 24, something happens that you did not plan for. Petronius dies. Not violently. Not dramatically. He is 63 years old and his heart simply stops one morning in his study. His body is found by one of the kitchen staff. This is catastrophic for you. When a slaveholder dies, their enslaved people become part of the estate, to be inherited, divided, or sold according to the will and the needs of the heirs. Petronius's heir is his son, Marcus. The same Marcus you served as a child. Now 31 years old, married, with his own household, his own finances, his own opinions about what to do with his father's property. You have a peculium that is, after 3 years of accumulation, worth perhaps a quarter of your market value. Not enough to purchase your freedom outright. Not even close. And Marcus has always looked at you with an expression you never quite trusted. Not cruelty, exactly. Something more like a man looking at a piece of furniture that belonged to his father, familiar, but not personally valuable. The 3 months after Petronius's death are the most frightening of your life. You continue working. You make yourself indispensable. You manage the estate correspondence during the chaos of probate, because no one else in the household can do it as well. You are visible. Useful. Irreplaceable. This is strategy as much as diligence. And it works. Marcus decides to keep you. Not because he has developed affection. Because the estate administrator tells him you are worth more employed than sold, and Marcus is his father's son, practical above all else. You go back to your room that night and you sit for a very long time. You think about Nikias, who died 2 years ago of a fever, and what he would say. The mind is the one thing they cannot own. 3 years later, at 27, you meet someone who changes everything again. His name is Quintus Aemilius Secundus. He is not enslaved. He is not a freedman. He is a Roman citizen, equestrian class, the second tier of the Roman aristocracy, who works in the imperial administration. Specifically, he works in the tabularium, the record office, managing census data and provincial correspondence. He needs a secretary with specific skills, Latin, Greek, and ideally some knowledge of North African or Egyptian administrative terminology. You have all three. Through a mutual contact, one of the merchants in Petronius's network, Quintus approaches Marcus about lending you to his office for specific projects. This was a normal practice. Wealthy Romans sometimes rented out their enslaved workers to others for temporary assignments. The money went to Marcus. You got the experience. Quintus is a different kind of person than anyone you've worked for. He is 40 years old, tired of the imperial bureaucracy, deeply knowledgeable, somewhat cynical, and, crucially, one of those Romans who has absorbed enough Stoic philosophy to genuinely believe that virtue is not determined by birth or status. He doesn't treat you like a person out of sentimentality. He treats you like a person because his philosophy requires it. The result is similar. You feel it. On your third day working with him, he asks you, casually, over a document, where you learn to read. You tell him about Nikias. Quintus is quiet for a moment. Then he says, a philosopher's student. And he spent his life as a domestic slave. That's a waste. You say, he didn't think so. He said the mind was the one thing they couldn't own. Quintus looks at you. He was right, he says. And wrong. They can try very hard. Now let's talk about the world outside Rome. Because your story doesn't happen in isolation. In 100 AD, the empire that contains you spans 5 million square kilometers. It contains somewhere between 50 and 70 million people. It is connected by 400,000 kilometers of roads, the most sophisticated transportation infrastructure ever built to that point in human history. Along those roads move armies, merchants, diplomats, pilgrims, and enslaved people. The slave trade of the Roman Empire was enormous. Estimates vary, but historians believe that at its height, Rome was importing somewhere between 100,000 and 500,000 new enslaved people per year. From conquered territories. From piracy. From exposed infants, children abandoned by their families, a Roman practice, who were picked up and raised as enslaved people. The people who looked like you, dark-skinned, sub-Saharan African in appearance, entered this system primarily through two routes. Trade networks that ran through Egypt and Nubia, kingdoms like Meroe that had complex trade relationships with Rome, and direct military conquest in North Africa. But here's what that history also contains. Dark-skinned people in Rome who were not enslaved. Who were never enslaved. Who came as merchants, as diplomats, as free travelers. The kingdom of Aksum, modern-day Ethiopia, was a major trading partner of Rome by this period. Aksumite merchants traveled to Roman ports regularly. They were free people. Rich people, sometimes. People with their own empire, their own currency, their own written language. When an Aksumite merchant walked through Rome, Romans did not see a slave. They saw a foreigner, peregrinus, a traveler, from a powerful kingdom. Wealthy Romans knew the difference. This matters to your story. Because it means that how Romans read your dark skin was not automatic. It depended on how you carried yourself. What you wore. What language you spoke and with what accent. Who you were seen with. Appearance was read through context. And context could be shaped. At 29, Quintus does something that is either generous or complicated, and possibly both. He offers to purchase your freedom from Marcus. Not as a gift. As a transaction. He will pay Marcus your market value, a sum I'll make specific, about 2,000 sestertii for a skilled secretary, which is roughly equivalent to 2 years of a common laborer's wages. And your accumulated peculium, about 800 sestertii at this point, will reduce that amount. Quintus would pay 1,200 sestertii. In exchange, you would be formally manumitted, through the legal ceremony, before a magistrate, and become a Roman citizen. You would take the name of your former owner, as was custom, you would be, officially, something like Quintus Aemilius, your name, the freedman of Marcus Petronius. Two things happen at once. You feel something enormous. And you feel something complicated. Because freedom purchased by someone else is still a transaction. You are moving from being Marcus's property to being Quintus's freedman, legally free, but bound by opre, the services owed to a patron. You will owe Quintus work. Deference. Loyalty. He will have a legal claim on your time. You are not fully free. You are differently unfree. You say yes anyway. Because differently unfree, with citizenship, with the legal right to exist as a person, with the right to enter contracts and own property and have your testimony heard in court, that is not the same as enslaved. It is not the same. The manumission ceremony is brief. You stand before a magistrate. Quintus stands beside you. Marcus is technically present, represented by his estate manager. A lictor, a civic officer, touches your shoulder with a rod. This is called the vindicta, literally, the claim. A symbolic gesture that reframes the claim on your body from ownership to citizenship. The magistrate speaks the words. You are free. You are a Roman citizen. You are, in the empire's eyes, a person. You walk out of the magistrate's office into the Roman afternoon, the smell of bread from a nearby bakery, the sound of cartwheels on stone, someone arguing in Greek 2 streets over, and you stand still for a moment. And you feel, not what you expected. Not pure joy. Not relief. Something more like arrival. The sense of having traveled an enormous distance to reach a place that was always, in some deep sense, yours. Rome is loud and smells bad and the sun is very bright. You are 30 years old. You are free. Now let's talk about what freedom actually means in Rome. Because this is where the comparison matters. You are a Roman citizen. That is real. That is legally significant. The rights are the right to vote, though in Rome's complex assembly system, your vote as a freedman in the lower classes has very little practical weight. The right to own property, real property. Land. Goods. Money. Your own. The right to enter legal contracts, to do business as yourself, not as an extension of your patron. The right to marry legally, connubium, the right to a legal Roman marriage with children who inherit your citizenship. The right not to be tortured in court proceedings, a right enslaved people explicitly did not have, and whose absence had been a constant background horror of your previous life. These rights are real. Substantive. Life-changing. But there are also things that don't change. You cannot hold public office for at least one generation. Your children, born free, born citizen, can stand for political positions, but you cannot. The social stigma of having been enslaved does not vanish with the legal ceremony. Romans had a word for it, libertinus, the social category of freed people, and it carried weight. In certain circles, people would know. Would remember. Would mention it. Your patron, Quintus, is legally and socially your patronus, your protector and your obligation simultaneously. You owe him services. He, in return, owes you a degree of protection and support. This relationship has rules, enforced by social expectation and occasionally by law. And then there is the physical reality. You still look like you. In a city that is diverse, genuinely diverse, but that has its centers of power, its networks of privilege, its unspoken hierarchies of who gets looked at twice and who gets waved through. You are still read, by some people, as a category. A type. Something to be assessed before being seen. This doesn't go away. It never fully goes away. Let's compare for a moment. Because context is everything. Take the same person, you, same appearance, same skills, same intelligence, and place them in a different time and place. Imperial China in 100 AD. The Han Dynasty. A dark-skinned person from outside the empire arriving as a traveler or merchant would be treated as an extraordinary curiosity, potentially honored as an exotic guest, but would have no pathway to citizenship or status. Take the same person to the medieval Islamic world, 700 AD. More complex. The caliphate was genuinely diverse, and dark-skinned scholars, generals, and poets held real positions of power. But slavery existed there too, with its own brutal logics. Take the same person to Europe in 1600 AD. The Atlantic slave trade is beginning. The logic of race as a fixed, biological, permanent category is being constructed specifically to justify it. A dark-skinned person in 1600 Europe faces a system that is actively building the ideology of race as a tool of exploitation in a way that Rome, for all its brutality, never systematized in quite the same way. Rome is not better than these systems. It is not a template for a just society. The enslavement of millions is not redeemed by the fact that it wasn't organized along color lines. But the specific shape of your experience in Rome, the possibility of literacy, of peculium, of manumission, of citizenship, is real. It is documented. It is different from what came later in Western history. And that difference matters for your specific story. At 33, you are working for Quintus full-time as his freedman's secretary. You are also, quietly, building something. In Rome, freedmen who had accumulated skills and connections often became businessmen in their own right. The equestrian and senatorial classes were legally restricted from certain kinds of commerce, trade was considered below their dignity, so they conducted business through freedmen agents, who acted on their behalf and took a percentage. You have, over 3 years of freedom, made connections. Merchants who knew Petronius. Administrators who have worked with Quintus. Traders in the Subura who have seen your face at the Temple of Isis every festival day for 15 years. You begin, carefully, in small amounts, to trade on your own account. Specifically, you broker introductions. You connect Syrian textile merchants with Roman buyers. You translate for North African grain traders who are having difficulty navigating Roman contract law. You take a small fee. You keep careful records. In a year, your personal savings reach 5,000 sestertii. In 2 years, 12,000. You are becoming, in the language of Rome, a man of substance. Not wealthy. Not powerful. Not safe, exactly, no one is ever fully safe in a system this large and this indifferent. But visible. Present. Real. At 35, you get married. Her name is Miriam. She is the daughter of a Jewish freedman family who have been in Rome for 2 generations. Her grandfather was brought from Jerusalem after the siege of 70 AD, sold, eventually freed, and built a small but stable business in the Subura. She is a Roman citizen born free. Her children, your children, will be Roman citizens born free with 2 free parents. In the Roman legal system, this matters enormously. The social memory of slavery fades by the 2nd generation. Her children will face no legal stigma for their grandfather's status. You get married in a small ceremony. Not the elaborate patrician wedding, the conferiatio, with its spelled wheat and witnesses. A simpler form, usus or coemptio, but legal, witnessed, binding. Quintus attends. He brings wine. Your mother attends. She is 52 years old, still enslaved in what was Petronius's household and is now Marcus's. She is too old to be sold. Marcus keeps her out of habit and the small usefulness of her medical knowledge. She has, in practice, a degree of autonomy that her legal status doesn't reflect. She stands in the courtyard of Miriam's father's house and she watches you get married and she does not cry. She is not a woman who cries easily. She looks at you for a long moment with an expression that contains everything, all of it, the years, the loss, the distance from home, the fear, the love, the endurance, and she nods. That nod is the most valuable thing anyone has given you. At 38, you have 2 children. A daughter, 7 years old, named Emilia, taking Quintus's family name, as is custom, but she will carry it differently than he does. She has your eyes and Miriam's decisiveness and she already knows more Latin grammar than some freeborn Roman boys her age. A son, 4 years old, named Nicaeus. You gave him that name on purpose. They are Roman citizens. Born free. No asterisk. They will face things. The world is not fair and Rome is not kind and their dark skin will be seen and assessed by strangers every day of their lives. But they will have legal personhood from the moment of birth. They will have the right to their own property. Their own marriages. Their own futures. And they will have you. Who knows exactly how this system works, where the pressure points are, where the opportunities hide, what the rules actually say versus what people claim they say. This is the inheritance you can give them. Not land. Not an aristocratic name. Not political connections. Knowledge of the machine. And the absolute conviction, learned from Nicaeus, earned through 38 years of living inside the structure, that the mind is the one thing they cannot own. Unless you let them. So let's finally answer the question. What if you were born in ancient Rome, but you looked like me? The answer is, it depends on everything except what you look like. It depends on where you are born. Into slavery or into freedom. Into wealth or poverty. Into a household that values intelligence or one that doesn't. It depends on who sees you. Who decides your value. Who, in the machinery of Rome, you manage to become useful to. It depends on luck. On who dies when. On what opportunities arrive and whether you are positioned to take them. It depends on your own intelligence, your own endurance, your own willingness to navigate a system that was not built for you and does not care about you and will use you if it can. This is not a comforting answer. But it is the true one. Your dark skin, in ancient Rome, was not the primary axis of your oppression. Your enslaved status was. And enslaved status, unlike the racial categories constructed in later centuries, was not permanent. Was not inherited automatically. Could, with enormous difficulty and the right conditions, be escaped. This is not a defense of Rome. Rome enslaved millions. The system was brutal and unjust at its foundation. But when you ask specifically, what would my life look like, as a dark-skinned person, in ancient Rome, the answer is, more varied, more complicated, and more full of possible outcomes than you might have been taught. There were dark-skinned slaves who died in the mines. There were dark-skinned freedmen who became wealthy merchants. There were dark-skinned soldiers who rose to officer rank in the Roman legions. There were dark-skinned priests who commanded the respect of senators. And there was, at least by strong historical possibility, a dark-skinned man from North Africa who rose through the Roman military and administrative ranks to become, in 193 AD, 90 years after this story takes place, the Emperor of Rome. His name was Septimius Severus. Born in Leptis Magna, in modern-day Libya. Dark-skinned enough that ancient sources specifically mention his complexion. Spoke Latin with an accent he never fully lost. Married a Syrian woman. Commanded the most powerful military machine on earth. Emperor of Rome. The Eternal City. The center of the world. His city. As much as anyone's. Here is what I want you to sit with. The story we tell about who belongs in history, about whose faces were at the center of the ancient world's greatest civilizations, is incomplete. Not maliciously incomplete, always. Sometimes just incomplete because the people doing the telling have never asked certain questions. What did it feel like to be the person in the room who looked different? What did it cost? What did it take? What did it make possible that couldn't have been made possible any other way? Those questions have answers. They're in the historical record, imperfectly, fragmentarily, waiting for someone to look. And when you look, Rome gets larger. More complicated. More human. Not the marble fantasy. Not the toga epic. The real thing. 1 million people, 50 languages, every color under the Mediterranean sun, all of them trying to survive inside a system that was brilliant and brutal and temporary, like every system ever built. All of them Roman. All of them there. Now here is my question for you. We talked about 3 paths: slave, soldier, freedman, businessman. I